It was a Tuesday afternoon in downtown Richmond, and the sun was beating down hard on the busy streets. Director Alicia Washington had just finished one of the most important meetings of her career. For the past 3 hours, she had been sitting in a small conference room with local police chiefs discussing a major federal investigation that could change everything for their city. But nobody on the street knew who she was. That was the whole point. She was dressed like any other woman running errands, simple jeans, a white t-shirt, and comfortable sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she wore no makeup. This wasn't by accident. When you're the head of the FBI, sometimes you need to blend in completely. She walked slowly toward her car. A plain black sedan parked 2 blocks away. The meeting had gone well, but she was tired. These undercover operations always drained her energy. She had to be careful about every word she said, every gesture she made. One wrong move could blow months of careful planning as she reached for her car keys. She noticed a police cruiser slowing down beside her. The officer inside was staring at her through his window. She didn't think much of it at first. Police cars were everywhere in this part of town. Officer Tommy Richardson had been having a bad day. His coffee had gone cold hours ago. His partner had called in sick, and his wife had texted him about another expensive car repair. He was driving his patrol route when he spotted a woman walking alone near some expensive shops and restaurants. Something about her bothered him. She didn't look like she belonged in this neighborhood. Her clothes were too casual, too plain. Most people around here wore business suits or designer outfits. She looked nervous too, the way she kept looking around. His 15 years as a cop, he had learned to trust his gut feelings about suspicious people. He pulled his car over and got out. "Excuse me, miss," he called out loudly. "Can I have a word with you?" Alicia turned around, surprised. She had been lost in her thoughts. "About the meeting?" "Yes, officer. Is there a problem?" Richardson walked closer, his hand resting on his belt near his radio. "I need to see some identification. We've had reports of drug activity in this area." This caught Alicia completely off guard. Drug activity? He looked around at the busy street filled with office workers and shoppers. This was one of the safest areas in the city. "I'm sorry, officer, but I think there's been some mistake. I was just heading to my car after a business meeting." "Sure you were," Richardson said with a smirk. "That's what they all say. Look, I can smell marijuana on you from here. Empty your pockets and let me search your purse." Alicia felt her heart rate increase. This was not happening. Not today. Not when she had such important work to do. "Officer, I think you're confused. I don't use drugs, and I certainly don't smell like marijuana. I'm a federal agent." Richardson laughed out loud. "A federal agent? Lady, do you think I was born yesterday? You're dressed like you just rolled out of bed. Federal agents don't walk around looking homeless." The words hit Alicia like a slap in the face. Homeless? She took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. She had dealt with difficult people before, but this was different. This man wasn't just being rude. He was being dangerous. "Officer Richardson," she said, reading his name tag carefully. "I understand you're doing your job, but I need you to listen to me carefully. I am Director Alicia Washington of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I have identification in my purse that will prove this." Richardson's face turned red with anger. "Stop lying to me. You think making up some fancy story is going to get you out of trouble? I've heard every excuse in the book. Drug dealers, thieves, con artists, they all think they're smarter than me." He grabbed his radio and called for backup. "Unit 47 requesting immediate assistance. I've got a suspected drug possession case, and the suspect is being uncooperative and claiming to be some kind of federal agent. She's probably high on something." Alicia closed her eyes for a moment. This was spiraling out of control fast. In her 25 years of law enforcement, she had never been in a situation quite like this. She had faced down dangerous criminals, corrupt politicians, and even foreign spies. But she had never been treated like a common criminal by one of her own. "Officer Richardson, please. Before your backup arrives, just call your supervisor. Tell them you have someone claiming to be FBI Director Washington. They can verify my identity in 30 seconds. I'm not calling anybody until I search you in your car," Richardson shot back. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for possession of narcotics and impersonating a federal officer." The handcuffs clicked shut around Alicia's wrists. She couldn't believe this was really happening. Around them, people had started to stop and stare. Taking pictures with their phones, others were whispering to each other and pointing. Richardson walked over to her car and tried the door handle. It was unlocked. Well. Let's see what goodies you've got hidden in here, officer. That vehicle contains classified federal documents. You do not have legal authority to search it without a warrant. Save the legal talk for someone. Who cares? Richardson said as he opened the car door. I've got probable cause based on the smell of drugs. Inside the car, Richardson found exactly what he wasn't expecting. Instead of drugs or stolen goods, he found a briefcase filled with official FBI documents. There were folders marked Top Secret and Eyes Only. There was also a spare FBI badge and identification card, but Richardson was too stubborn to admit he might be wrong. Nice props, he said loudly. You can buy fake badges online these days. Real convincing stuff. By now, 3 more police cars had arrived. Officers were getting out and walking toward the scene. Richardson felt proud of himself. He was convinced he had caught a major criminal, someone who was probably part of a bigger drug operation. Sergeant Mike Torres was the first backup officer to arrive. He had been a cop for 20 years and had seen everything. Something about this arrest didn't feel right to him. The woman in handcuffs looked too calm, too professional. Most drug suspects were either angry, scared, or high. This woman looked like she was waiting patiently for something. What do we have here, Richardson? Torres asked. Major Bust Sarge. This one was walking around the business district looking suspicious. Claims to be some FBI director, but look at her. Does she look like any FBI director you've ever seen? Torres looked at Alicia carefully. She met his eyes. With a steady gaze, there was something about her that reminded him of the federal agents he had worked with before. They had a certain way of carrying themselves, even in difficult situations. Ma'am, what's your name? Torres asked gently. Director Alicia Washington, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Sergeant, I need you to contact your captain immediately. This situation is about to become very complicated for everyone involved. Richardson interrupted. Don't listen to her, Sarge. She's been lying since I stopped her. Probably has a whole fake identity set up. But Torres was already reaching for his radio. Something in the woman's voice told him this was bigger than a simple drug arrest. Much bigger. Sergeant Torres held his radio, but didn't make the call yet. Wanted to understand what was happening before he brought his captain into this mess. Meanwhile, Officer Richardson was getting more aggressive by the minute. Look at all this fake stuff, Richardson said, waving the FBI documents in the air like they were trash. She's got the whole setup here. Fake badges, fake papers, probably fake everything. This is way bigger than I thought. More people were gathering around now. Office workers on their lunch break, shoppers, even some teenagers with their phones, out recording everything. The crowd was making Richardson nervous, but it was also making him feel important. He thought he was about to become famous for catching a major criminal. Alicia watched everything unfold with growing concern. Not for herself. She knew this would all get sorted out eventually. But she was worried about what this meant for Richardson's career and for the police department's reputation. Every second this continued, more people were recording. More evidence was piling up that could destroy lives. Officer Richardson, she said calmly, I understand you think you're doing the right thing, but I need you to know that everything you're doing right now is being recorded. Every word you say, every action you take. When this is over and my identity is confirmed, all of this will be reviewed. Richardson spun around to face her, his face red with anger. Are you threatening me? Did everyone hear that? She's threatening a police officer. I'm not threatening anyone, Alicia replied. I'm trying to help you understand the situation you're in. Richardson was beyond listening now. He was convinced that this woman was not just a drug dealer, but someone dangerous, someone who thought she was smarter than him. He had arrested hundreds of people over the years, and they all tried to talk their way out of trouble. And this was just another con artist with better props. You know what I think? Richardson said, walking closer to where Alicia stood in handcuffs. I think you're part of some big operation? Nobody goes through this much trouble to fake being FBI unless they're hiding something really big. Torres was starting to feel uncomfortable. He'd worked with Richardson before, and he knew the man could be stubborn. But this felt different. This felt like Richardson was digging himself into a hole that would be hard to climb out of. "Richardson, maybe we should slow down here," Torres said carefully. "Let me just make a quick call to verify." "No," Richardson cut him off. "Don't you see what's happening? She's got you fooled too. That's what these people do. They dress up nice, they talk fancy, they make you think there's something there. Not the words these people hung in the air like a dark cloud." Everyone who heard it understood exactly what Richardson meant. Alicia felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her voice steady. "Officer Richardson, what exactly do you mean by these people?" Richardson realized he had said something wrong, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. People who don't belong in neighborhoods like this, people who come here too, cause trouble and then try to talk their way out of it. Torres stepped forward. "Richardson, that's enough. You need to calm down." But Richardson was on a roll now. Felt like everyone was against him. His sergeant, the crowd, even his own. Radio dispatcher who had been asking for updates. He needed to prove he was right, that his arrest was justified. "Look at her," Richardson said to the crowd that had gathered. "Does she look like someone who belongs in this part of town? Does she look like an FBI director to you? A woman in..." The crowd called out, "She looks like she could be anything. Can't judge people by how they dress." "Oh, really?" Richardson shot back. "Then why was she acting so suspicious? Why did she look nervous when she saw my car? Innocent people don't act like that." Alicia had heard enough. "Officer Richardson, I was not acting suspicious. I was walking to my car after a legitimate business meeting. The only reason I looked concerned when I saw your car was because I could tell you were staring at me for no apparent reason." "No apparent reason?" Richardson laughed bitterly. "Lady, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I know trouble. When I see it, and you are definitely trouble." Another police car pulled up, and Officer Jenny Walsh got out. She was younger than the others, only 5 years on the force, but she had a reputation for being smart and careful. She took one look at the scene and knew something was very wrong. "What's the situation?" she asked Torres quietly. Richardson stopped this woman for suspected drug possession. "She claims to be FBI Director Washington. You think she's lying?" Walsh looked at the woman in handcuffs more carefully. She had studied photos of federal law enforcement leaders during her training. Something about this woman's face looked familiar. Meanwhile, Richardson was still talking to the crowd, trying to justify his actions. "This is what's wrong with our city. People like this think they can go anywhere and do anything. They think they're above the law." "Officer Richardson," Alicia said firmly, "you're making statements that could be considered discriminatory. I strongly advise you to stop talking and call your supervisor. Discriminatory." Richardson's voice got louder. "Not discriminating. Against anyone? I'm just doing my job. I don't see color. I see criminals." The crowd was getting bigger now, and people were starting to take sides. Some were supporting Richardson, saying he was just doing his job. Others were saying he was clearly out of line. The tension was building like a storm about to break. Torres tried one more time to calm things down. "Richardson, let's just make the call to verify her identity. If she's lying, we'll know in 2 minutes. If she's telling the truth, we need to handle this very carefully." "I'm not calling anyone," Richardson shouted. "This is my arrest. I know what I'm doing." That's when Walsh stepped forward. She had been quietly watching and listening, and she had made up her mind. "Sergeant Torres, I think we need to contact Captain Rodriguez immediately. The situation is escalating beyond what we can handle here." "Nobody's calling the captain," Richardson said, panic creeping into his voice. "I can handle this myself." But it was too late. Torres was already on his radio. "Dispatch, this is Sergeant Torres. I need Captain Rodriguez at my location immediately. We have a situation that requires immediate supervision." Richardson looked around desperately. The crowd was bigger now. The cameras were rolling, and his backup officers were starting to distance themselves from him. He could feel everything slipping away, but he couldn't admit he might be wrong. Not now. Not after going this far. "Fine," he said bitterly. "Call whoever you want. But when this is over, when we find drugs in her car, or her system, don't come crying to me about how we should have trusted a criminal." Alicia stood, quietly in her handcuffs. watching Richardson destroy his career, one word at a time. She felt sorry for him in a way. She had seen good officers make bad decisions before, but she had never seen someone dig their own grave quite this enthusiastically. The radio crackled to life. All units, Captain Rodriguez is en route. 8 to 3 minutes. Those 3 minutes were going to feel like hours. Captain Rodriguez had been having a quiet afternoon when his radio exploded with chatter. Multiple units at one location, a crowd gathering, and something about an FBI director. His first thought was that there had been some kind of terrorist threat or federal operation gone wrong. He never imagined the truth would be so much worse. As his patrol car turned the corner, he could see the chaos from 2 blocks away. There were at least 4 police cars, a crowd of maybe 50 people, and phones recording everything. This was exactly the kind of situation that ended up on the evening news and ruined careers, officer. Richardson saw the captain's car approaching and felt a mixture of relief and panic. Relief because his boss was here to back him up. Panic because he was starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, he had made a terrible mistake. Everyone stay back, Richardson called to the crowd. The captain's here now. We'll sort this whole thing out. Captain Rodriguez parked his car and walked slowly toward the scene. He was a careful man who had survived 23 years in law enforcement by thinking before acting. The first thing he noticed was the woman in handcuffs. She stood calmly, almost peacefully, while chaos swirled around her. That wasn't normal. Most people under arrest were angry, scared, or trying to argue their way out of trouble. Torres. What's the situation? Rodriguez asked his sergeant. Captain Officer Richardson made an arrest for suspected drug possession. Suspect claims to be FBI Director Washington. Richardson believes she's lying and using fake credentials. Rodriguez looked at the woman again. There was something familiar about her face, but he couldn't place it. Ma'am, what's your name? Director Alicia Washington, Federal Bureau of Investigation, she replied calmly. Captain, I need to speak with you privately for just one moment. She's been saying that for 20 minutes, Richardson interrupted. Captain, don't let her fool you like she tried to fool everyone else. I know criminals when I see them. Rodriguez held up his hand to quiet Richardson. Something about this whole situation felt wrong. In his experience, real criminals didn't usually stay this calm when they were caught. And they definitely didn't ask to speak privately with commanding officers. Ma'am, what would you like to tell me? Alicia spoke quietly but clearly. Captain, in my wallet, you'll find a card with a direct phone number to FBI headquarters. It's a secure line that bypasses normal channels. If you call that number and ask for Deputy Director Chen, he can verify my identity within 30 seconds. Stepped forward aggressively. Captain, she's had plenty of time to think up this story. Don't you see what she's doing? She's trying to confuse everyone with fancy details. But Rodriguez was already walking toward Alicia's purse, which was sitting on the hood of Richardson's patrol car. Inside her wallet, exactly where she said it would be, was a small white card with nothing on it except a phone number and the FBI seal. Torres, come here, Rodriguez called to his sergeant. I want you to witness this call. Rodriguez dialed the number on his cell phone. It rang twice before a professional voice answered. Deputy Director Chen's office, this is Agent Kim. This is Captain Rodriguez with Richmond Police Department. I need to verify the identity of someone claiming to be Director Washington. There was a pause. Sir, is Director Washington safe? We've been trying to reach her for the past hour. Rodriguez felt his stomach drop. Ma'am, can you describe Director Washington for me? African-American woman, approximately 5 feet 6 inches, brown eyes, usually wears her hair in a ponytail when she's doing field work. She was attending a classified meeting in your city today. Rodriguez looked at the woman in handcuffs. Every detail matched perfectly. He felt the blood drain from his face. Agent Kim, I need to transfer you to Deputy Director Chen immediately. Hold on, sir. A few seconds later, a deep voice came on the line. This is Deputy Director Chen. Who am I speaking with? Captain Rodriguez, Richmond PD, sir. I believe one of my officers has arrested Director Washington by mistake. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted forever. When Chen finally spoke, his voice was deadly serious. Captain, is Director Washington injured? No, sir. She appears to be fine. Is she still in custody? Rodriguez looked at Richardson, who was standing there with his mouth open, finally starting to understand what was happening. Yes, sir. She's still in handcuffs. Captain Rodriguez, I need you to release Director Washington immediately. Then I need you to secure the scene and preserve all evidence, including body camera footage. This is now a federal matter. Rodriguez hung up the phone and walked over to where Alicia stood, waiting patiently. His hands were shaking as he took out his keys to unlock the handcuffs. Director Washington, I am so sorry. This should never have happened. As the handcuffs came off, Alicia rubbed her wrists gently. Thank you, Captain. I appreciate your professionalism in handling this situation. Richardson was standing 10 feet away, and he looked like he had seen a ghost. The reality of what he had done was finally sinking in. He had arrested the head of the FBI. He had called her a liar, a criminal, a drug dealer. He had searched her car without permission, had made discriminatory comments in front of witnesses and cameras. This can't be happening, Richardson whispered to himself. This can't be real. Torres walked over to Richardson and quietly took his service weapon and badge. Richardson, you're suspended immediately, pending investigation. You need to leave the scene now. But I was just doing my job, Richardson protested, his voice cracking. She looks suspicious. How was I supposed to know? Alicia turned to face Richardson directly. For the first time since this whole thing started, she looked truly sad. Officer Richardson, you weren't doing your job. You were making assumptions based on how I looked, where I was, and what you thought I should be. That's not police work. That's prejudice. I'm not prejudiced, Richardson shouted desperately. I don't care what color anyone is. I just saw someone who looked out of place. Officer Richardson, Alicia said gently. I was wearing jeans and a t-shirt in broad daylight on a public street. I was walking to my car after a business meeting. What exactly looked out of place about that? Richardson opened his mouth to answer, but couldn't find words. When he really thought about it, there had been nothing suspicious about her behavior at all. Nothing except the color of her skin and his own assumptions about who belonged in that neighborhood. Captain Rodriguez was on his radio, calling for internal affairs and trying to control the damage. The crowd was still recording everything, and he knew this story would be on social media within minutes. Officer Walsh approached Alicia carefully. Ma'am, Director Washington, is there anything we can do for you? Do you need medical attention? A ride somewhere? Thank you, Officer Walsh. I'm fine physically. I would like to retrieve my belongings and continue with my scheduled activities if possible. Rodriguez handed her the car keys and her purse. Of course, ma'am. Again, I cannot express how sorry I am about this incident. Alicia looked around at all the officers, at Richardson, who was now sitting in the back of a patrol car, at the crowd of people still watching and recording. Captain Rodriguez, this incident will be investigated thoroughly by federal authorities. But I want you to know that I don't hold your entire department responsible for one officer's actions. You and your other officers handled this professionally once you understood the situation. As Alicia walked toward her car, Richardson called out from the patrol car window. Wait, please, made a mistake. Can't we just forget this happened? Alicia stopped and turned around one last time. Officer Richardson, some mistakes are too big to just forget. But maybe if you're willing to learn from this, some good can come from it. Then she got in her car and drove away, leaving behind a scene that would change everything for everyone involved. Within 30 minutes of Director Washington driving away, the story was everywhere. Cell phone videos were being shared on social media faster than anyone could count them. News vans were pulling up to the police station. Reporters were calling. Every contact they had in law enforcement was trying to get the full story. Captain Rodriguez sat in his office with his head in his hands. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since he got back to the station. The mayor's office, the police commissioner, the FBI, and at least a dozen news outlets all wanted answers. But the worst call had been from his wife, who had seen the video on Facebook and was worried about his career. Officer Richardson was in a small interview room down the hall, waiting to meet with internal affairs investigators. He had been sitting there for 2 hours, replaying every moment of the arrest in his mind. Each time he thought about it, he felt sicker. He kept trying to convince himself that he had done the right thing, but deep down, he knew the truth. At FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., the mood was completely different. Deputy Director Chen had called an emergency meeting with all department heads. The arrest of their director wasn't just an embarrassment, it was a security concern and a potential federal crime. "How did this happen?" asked Assistant Director Park, who ran the Criminal Investigation Division. "How does a local cop arrest the FBI director without anyone stopping him? Because he refused to listen," Chen replied grimly. "We have the body camera footage now." Richardson was told multiple times who she was, but he chose not to believe it. Back in Richmond, Director Washington was in her hotel room, finally able to change out of the clothes she had been wearing during the arrest. Her assistant had brought her a fresh suit and was briefing her on all the calls that had come in during the past few hours. "The Attorney General wants to speak with you as soon as possible," her assistant said. "The President's office has also called, and there are about 50 interview requests from news organizations." Washington nodded tiredly. She had known this would happen. In today's world, nothing stayed private for long, especially when it involved police and race relations. "Set up the call with the Attorney General for 1 hour from now," she said, "and prepare a statement for the press. We need to get ahead of this story before it gets out of control." Meanwhile, at the Richmond Police Department, Internal Affairs investigator Lieutenant Brooks was reviewing all the evidence. She had been doing this job for 8 years, and she had seen officers make mistakes before, but this was different. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a pattern of behavior that had finally caught up with Richardson. She pulled up Richardson's personnel file on her computer. What she found there wasn't surprising, but it was damaging. Over the past 5 years, Richardson had received 12 complaints about his conduct during traffic stops. 11 of those complaints had come from minority drivers. Most had been dismissed due to lack of evidence, but the pattern was clear. "Captain Rodriguez," she called into his office. "You need to see this." Rodriguez walked over and looked at the computer screen. His heart sank even further. How did we miss this pattern? Because each complaint was handled separately, Brooks explained. Nobody ever looked at them all together. But now that we have, it's obvious that Richardson has been profiling drivers for years. Back in the interview room, Richardson was getting more nervous by the minute. He had asked for a lawyer, but the police union representative wouldn't arrive for another hour. He kept thinking about his family, his mortgage, his pension. 15 years on the force, and it could all disappear because of one arrest. When Lieutenant Brooks finally entered the room, she was carrying a thick folder. "Officer Richardson, I'm Lieutenant Brooks from Internal Affairs. I need to ask you some questions about what happened today." "Look, Lieutenant, I know I made a mistake, but I was just trying to do my job." The woman looked suspicious, and I had to check it out. Brooks opened the folder and spread out several complaint forms on the table. "Tommy, these are complaints filed against you over the past 5 years. 12 different people, 11 of them minorities, all claiming you treated them unfairly during traffic stops." Richardson looked at the papers and felt his stomach drop. Those were all investigated. Most of them were dismissed. They were dismissed individually, but together they show a pattern. A pattern that led to what happened today. "I'm not racist," Richardson said loudly. "I stop people based on suspicious behavior, not skin color." "Then explain to me what was suspicious about Director Washington walking to her car in broad daylight." Richardson opened his mouth, but no words came out. When he really thought about it, there had been nothing suspicious at all. She had been walking normally, minding her own business, in a public place during the day. 3 hours later, Director Washington held her first press conference since the incident. She stood behind a podium at FBI headquarters, wearing a crisp blue suit, looking every inch the professional law enforcement leader she was. "This afternoon, I was arrested by a Richmond police officer while conducting official FBI business," she began. "I want to be clear, this was not just a case of mistaken identity. This was an example of the racial profiling that too many Americans face every day." The room full of reporters was silent, hanging on every word. "However, I also want to acknowledge the professional response of Captain Rodriguez and several other..." Richmond officers who corrected the situation as soon as they understood what was happening. This incident shows both the problem and the potential solution. One reporter raised her hand. Director Washington, will you be pressing charges against Officer Richardson? That decision will be made by federal prosecutors after a thorough investigation. But I will say this. Officer Richardson's actions today violated my civil rights under federal law. No one should be treated the way I was treated, regardless of their race or position. At the same time, Richardson was being escorted out of the police station by his union representative. Porters surrounded his car, shouting questions, but he said nothing. His lawyer had advised him to stay quiet until they knew what charges he might face. The next morning, the story was front page. News across the country. FBI director arrested by local cop was the headline in most papers. Television news shows spent hours analyzing the body camera footage and discussing what it meant for police reform. Director Washington watched the coverage from her office, knowing that this incident would define much of her remaining time as FBI director. But she also saw it as an opportunity. For years, she had been talking about the need for better police training and accountability. Now she had a personal example that no one could ignore. Her phone rang. It was the Attorney General. Alicia, I've been watching the news coverage. How are you holding up? I'm fine, General. I think we need to use this moment to push for real change. This can't just be another story that disappears in a week. I agree completely. What do you have in mind? Washington smiled for the first time since the arrest. I have some ideas. Big ideas. The incident that had started as a humiliating mistake was about to become the catalyst for something much larger. 6 months after that Tuesday afternoon in Richmond, the federal courthouse was packed. Media trucks lined the street outside. Reporters waited for any news about the sentencing hearing that would finally close this chapter of a story that had changed everything. Officer Tommy Richardson sat at the defendant's table, wearing a cheap suit that didn't fit him well. He had lost weight during the past months, and he looked older than his 42 years. His lawyer, a public defender named Collins, shuffled through papers nervously. They both knew this wasn't going to end well. The federal prosecutors had been thorough. After investigating Richardson's arrest record, they found evidence of a clear pattern of racial profiling spanning nearly a decade. What started as one bad arrest had uncovered years of constitutional violations. Richardson had already pleaded guilty to violating Director Washington's civil rights under color of law. His lawyer had advised him that fighting the charges would only make things worse. The evidence was overwhelming, and a jury trial would have meant much harsher punishment. In the months since the arrest, Richardson's life had completely fallen apart. He lost his job immediately, of course. His wife filed for divorce after the constant media attention became too much for their family. His 2 teenage children were embarrassed to tell their friends who their father was. House was in foreclosure because he couldn't find work anywhere. All rise, the bailiff called out. The Honorable Judge Patricia Williams presiding. Judge Williams was known for being fair but firm. She had spent 30 years on the bench and had seen every kind of case imaginable. But this one was special. It wasn't often that a local police officer's actions made national news and sparked conversations about police reform across the country as she settled into her chair. Judge Williams looked around the packed courtroom. In the front row, she could see Director Washington sitting quietly with several FBI officials. Behind them were members of Richardson's family, civil rights activists, other police officers, and dozens of journalists. Mr. Richardson, please. Stand, Judge Williams said. Richardson stood up slowly, his legs shaking slightly. This was the moment he had been dreading for months. Mr. Richardson, you have pleaded guilty to violating the civil rights of FBI Director Washington under federal law. Before I pass sentence, I want to give you an opportunity to address the court. Do you have anything to say? Richardson's lawyer had prepared a statement, but now that the moment was here, Richardson felt like he needed to speak from his heart. Your Honor, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. I want to say that I'm sorry. Not just because I got caught, but because I finally understand what I did wrong. He paused and looked back at Director Washington, who was watching him calmly. For 15 years, I thought I was a good cop. I thought I was protecting my community. But the truth is, I was judging people based on how they looked, not what they were doing. I arrested Director Washington because she was a black woman in a neighborhood where I thought she didn't belong. That wasn't police work. That was racism. The courtroom was completely silent. Even the reporters had stopped writing to listen. No, saying sorry doesn't fix anything, Richardson continued. I know I hurt Director Washington. I embarrassed my department, and I let down every good police officer who does their job the right way. I deserve whatever punishment you give. Me. Judge Williams nodded. Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Director Washington, would you like to address the court? Director Washington stood up and walked to the podium. She had thought carefully about what she wanted to say today. And this wasn't just about punishing one officer. This was about sending a message that would hopefully prevent other people from going through what she experienced. Your Honor, what happened to me 6 months ago was humiliating and frightening. But I was lucky, I had the resources and position to fight back. Most people who experience racial profiling don't have those advantages. She turned to look at Richardson directly. Officer Richardson, I accept your apology. I believe you're genuinely sorry for what you did, but being sorry isn't enough. You violated the trust that society places in police officers. You used your badge and your gun to harass an innocent person because of the color of her skin. Richardson was crying now, tears streaming down his face. However, Director Washington continued, I don't believe that destroying your life completely will serve justice. What would serve justice is making sure this never happens again. Judge Williams leaned forward. Director Washington, are you making a recommendation about sentencing? Your Honor, I believe Officer Richardson should serve time in prison as a consequence for his actions. But I also believe he should be required to speak to police departments across the country about what he learned from this experience. His story could help prevent other officers from making the same mistakes. The suggestion surprised everyone. In the courtroom, including Richardson himself, Judge Williams considered this for several minutes before speaking. Mr. Richardson, the federal sentencing guidelines recommend 18 to 24 months in prison for your crimes. However, I'm going to sentence you to 15 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. Richardson's shoulders sagged with relief. It was still a harsh sentence, but it could have been much worse. Additionally, Judge Williams continued, as a condition of your probation, you will participate in a police education program developed by Director Washington and the FBI. You will speak to police departments about the dangers of racial profiling and the importance of treating all citizens with dignity and respect. After the hearing, Director Washington stood outside the courthouse answering reporters' questions. Director Washington, why did you ask for leniency for Officer Richardson? One reporter asked. Because revenge isn't justice, she replied. Justice is preventing this from happening to other people. If Officer Richardson can help train better police officers, then something good can come from this terrible experience. What changes have you seen in police departments since your arrest? We've already implemented new training programs in over 200 police departments nationwide. We're teaching officers to recognize their own biases and to make decisions based on behavior, not appearance. We've also improved the complaint process, so patterns of misconduct are identified earlier. Another reporter called out, has this experience changed you personally? Director Washington paused before answering. It reminded me why I became a law enforcement officer in the first place. To protect and serve all people, regardless of who they are or what they look like. That mission is more important now than ever. 1 year later, Officer Richardson stood in front of a room full of police cadets in Atlanta. He was nervous, as he always was before these presentations, but he knew his story was important. My name is Tommy Richardson, he began. I want to tell you about the worst day of my career. The day I arrested the FBI director because I couldn't see past the color of her skin. In the back of the room, a training instructor watched carefully. These presentations had become some of the most powerful parts of their bias training program. Hearing from someone who had actually made these mistakes was more effective than any textbook or lecture. Director Washington had been right. Sometimes the best way to prevent future mistakes was to learn from past ones. And sometimes, people who fall the farthest can help others avoid the same fall. The incident that began with one officer's prejudice had become a catalyst for change. Across American law enforcement, it proved that even in the darkest moments, there was always hope for something better.